You have spent so much time trying to figure out where things went wrong. You replay conversations in your head, searching for the exact moment the distance began. You wonder if you said the wrong thing, if you pushed too hard, or if you were simply too much. The exhaustion you feel is not just physical. It settles into your thoughts and makes you question your own judgment. You gave your patience and your willingness to make it work, but no matter what you adjusted, the ground kept shifting beneath you. That confusion was never an accident. It was the result of a pattern designed to keep you searching for answers in the wrong place. You were looking for fairness in a dynamic that was never built to be equal. The truth is simple, even if it took a long time to see it. You were not the problem. The situation was never about fixing your flaws or meeting impossible standards. It was about maintaining control through words that sounded like care, but functioned as anchors. When someone repeatedly uses specific phrases to keep you engaged, they are not trying to build connection. They are trying to preserve a balance that only works when you stay unsure of yourself. The psychological mechanism behind this is straightforward. Words carry weight, and when they are used consistently to shape your perception of reality, they become tools of emotional regulation. Not regulation for your comfort, but regulation for the other person's sense of security. A person who relies on control through language will not use obvious threats. They will use phrases that sound reasonable, familiar, or even caring. They will frame confusion as your fault, distance as your creation, and their own behavior as a natural response to your actions. This creates a loop where you keep adjusting and explaining, while the underlying structure remains unchanged. The goal is not resolution. The goal is predictability. When you are kept in a state of mild uncertainty, you become easier to manage. You stop trusting your own observations and start relying on their interpretation of events. That is how emotional entanglement replaces genuine connection. It happens through repeated phrases that slowly rewrite how you view yourself and the relationship. One of the most common phrases you will hear is that you are overreacting, or that it is not as serious as you are making it. The delivery is usually calm, almost dismissive, as if your emotional response is the only irregular element. The behavior here shifts the focus from the issue itself to your reaction to it. The psychology relies on creating doubt about your own perception. If you can be convinced that your feelings are disproportionate, then the original problem never has to be addressed. It redirects responsibility without ever acknowledging it. You start to monitor your tone and your timing, trying to present your concerns in a way that will not be labeled as excessive. The effect on you is gradual but deep. You begin to second-guess your instincts. You learn to shrink your needs so they fit into a framework where only the other person's comfort matters. Over time, this teaches you that your emotional reality is negotiable. You stop speaking up because you assume the conversation will only circle back to your reaction rather than the actual event. The truth is that your response was never the issue. The issue was the refusal to engage with what you actually experienced. Another phrase that often surfaces is the idea that no one else will ever understand you the way they do, or that you will not find this kind of connection anywhere else. It is usually said during moments of vulnerability, right after a conflict or during a period of reconciliation. The behavior relies on framing the relationship as rare and irreplaceable. The psychology is rooted in creating emotional dependency. When you believe that your value and your understanding are tied to one specific person, leaving becomes psychologically heavy. You start to weigh your current discomfort against the fear of future isolation. The effect is a quiet tightening of your boundaries. You stop reaching out to friends, you downplay your own social needs, and you accept emotional neglect because you have been convinced that replacement is impossible. This phrase does not build closeness. It builds a closed loop. It trains you to view the outside world as indifferent and the relationship as your only source of validation. The reality is that understanding is not a rare commodity. Healthy connection does not require you to abandon other relationships or tolerate poor treatment in order to keep someone close. The phrase is a boundary trap, disguised as intimacy. It keeps you in place by making the unknown seem unbearable. You will also hear variations of the idea that if you walk away, you will only prove that you were never capable of commitment, or that leaving will show exactly what kind of person you are. This is often framed as a warning, but it functions as a guilt mechanism. The behavior is projection. Instead of taking responsibility for the instability, the focus is placed on your potential exit as the real failure. The psychology here is defensive. By making your departure the ultimate proof of your flaws, the other person avoids examining their own role in the breakdown. You are placed in a position where staying looks like loyalty, and leaving looks like confirmation of every negative label. The effect on you is a heavy sense of obligation. You stay not because things are working, but because leaving feels like admitting defeat. You carry the weight of a narrative that was never yours to hold. This creates a paralysis where you tolerate increasing discomfort because the alternative feels like a moral failure. The truth is that walking away from dysfunction is not proof of weakness. It is a decision to stop participating in a cycle that drains you. Your character is not defined by how long you can endure poor treatment. It is defined by your willingness to recognize when something is no longer serving your well-being. A very common pattern involves hearing that their behavior is a direct result of your actions, or that you made them react the way they did. The phrasing is usually subtle, but the structure is clear. They describe their outbursts, their withdrawal, or their harsh words as unavoidable responses to your choices. The behavior here is blame shifting. It removes accountability from their actions and places it squarely on your shoulders. The psychology relies on the assumption that if you had just communicated differently, acted differently, or been more accommodating, the conflict would not have happened. It treats emotional regulation as something you are responsible for managing on their behalf. The effect is a constant state of walking on eggshells. You start analyzing your own behavior for hidden triggers, trying to prevent reactions before they even occur. You become the manager of someone else's emotional stability, which is an impossible and exhausting role. You lose sight of the fact that adults are responsible for their own responses. No matter how tense a situation becomes, you do not control how another person chooses to express frustration. When you are trained to believe otherwise, you absorb guilt that belongs elsewhere. This drains your energy and replaces self-trust with hypervigilance. You stop asking for what you need because you are too busy trying to keep the emotional temperature stable. The cycle often closes with promises that things will be different this time, that they are finally seeing the pattern, or that they just need one more chance to prove they can change. These words arrive after periods of distance, after you have reached a point of quiet detachment, or after you have started to pull back your energy. The behavior is re-engagement. It is designed to interrupt your healing momentum and pull you back into the familiar rhythm. The psychology behind it is simple. When the person senses that their influence is slipping, they offer just enough reassurance to reset the cycle. It does not require actual change. It only requires you to believe that change is possible. The effect is a reset of your hope. You start measuring progress against their words rather than their sustained actions. You give your energy back because the possibility of improvement feels more comfortable than the certainty of letting go. This keeps you moving in circles. You invest in potential instead of reality. You forgive patterns instead of recognizing them. The result is not growth. It is repetition disguised as reconciliation. Healthy relationships do not require you to ignore consistent behavior in favor of temporary promises. Real change is visible in daily actions, not in carefully timed conversations that appear only when your attention is drifting away. When you look at these phrases together, you begin to see the structure beneath them. They are not random comments. They are coordinated responses to your growing awareness. Each one serves a specific purpose in keeping you emotionally engaged while avoiding real accountability. The confusion you felt was manufactured by design. It was not a reflection of your inability to understand. It was the result of receiving mixed messages that kept you off balance. You were asked to trust words that consistently contradicted actions. You were told to adjust to a standard that kept moving. You were made to feel responsible for a dynamic you did not create. Recognizing this does not mean you were foolish for believing it. It means you were responding to a pattern that was engineered to keep you invested. Awareness begins when you stop measuring your worth against someone else's inconsistent narrative. It starts when you notice that the same phrases return whenever you try to set a boundary or step back. You begin to see that the goal was never resolution. The goal was maintenance of a system that benefited from your uncertainty. Stepping back emotionally does not require anger. It only requires clarity. You can acknowledge what was said without accepting it as truth. You can remember the conversations without letting them dictate your future choices. The shift happens quietly. You stop trying to decode their words and start observing the pattern behind them. You stop asking why they could not meet you halfway and start recognizing that they were never planning to. From this place of clarity, your response changes. You no longer need to argue with phrases that were designed to keep you engaged. You simply recognize them for what they are. Boundaries are not about changing the other person. They are about changing your own participation. When you hear familiar lines that previously triggered explanation or apology, you allow yourself to pause. You do not need to justify your position. You do not need to prove your point. You can choose calm detachment over emotional entanglement. This is not indifference. It is self-respect in practice. You stop offering your energy to conversations that go in circles. You stop accepting temporary reassurance as proof of permanent change. You begin to measure relationships by consistency, not by intensity. You understand that peace is more valuable than being right in a dynamic that will never acknowledge your reality. Detachment allows you to observe without absorbing. You can hear the words without letting them rewrite your sense of self. You can remember the past without letting it control your decisions. This is how you reclaim your mental space. You stop waiting for an apology that is structurally impossible. And you start building your life around reliability instead of potential. Your boundaries become quiet but firm. You respond less, but you protect yourself more. You no longer confuse familiarity with safety. You choose stability over the illusion of control. Healing does not require you to forget what happened. It requires you to stop letting it dictate how you move forward. You were caught in a system that relied on your willingness to doubt yourself. Now that you see the structure, you are no longer required to play a role that was never yours. You can close the loop without needing their validation. You can acknowledge the time you invested without letting it define your future. The peace you are looking for does not come from finally being understood by the person who kept you guessing. It comes from finally understanding yourself. It comes from recognizing that your need for consistency, respect, and clear communication was never excessive. It was necessary. You can carry the lessons forward without carrying the weight of someone else's unresolved patterns. Your future relationships do not need to be built on the same foundation. You now know what to look for. You know how to recognize when words are being used to manage you instead of connect with you. You know that your emotional energy is valuable, and it does not belong in places that require you to shrink yourself to be kept close. Moving forward is simply choosing your own clarity over their confusion. It is walking away from conversations that drain you and towards spaces that allow you to breathe. You do not need to prove your strength. You only need to maintain the boundaries you have already earned. The exhaustion will fade as you stop fighting for fairness in an uneven dynamic. Peace will return when you stop waiting for someone else to validate your reality. You already know the truth. You only need to trust it enough to live by it.